Transformative Principal, episode 75 with Will Parker. I'm really excited about this interview. I'm interviewing Will again. He is my first repeat guest on the show, and he just published a book called Principal Matters, which I have a link to in the show notes. Please go ahead and check that out, buy that, and help support him. He talks about a lot of really great stuff in this interview, and it's just great. We talk about how to make good decisions, how to delegate effectively, and how to make sure that those who you are working with actually know what their jobs are. So really great stuff in here. I hope you enjoy it, and thank you so much. You can follow me on Twitter at Jethro Jones. Hello, this is Jethro.
Hi, Jethro. It's Will Parker.
There we go. It's working.
It's exciting.
It is exciting. Oh, man. Good times.
And on top of that, we're principals.
That's
How
right.
to pull all that off.
It's amazing. All right. So that was way more difficult than it needed to be. And for that, I'm sorry.
I'm just glad no, you don't need to apologize for anything. I'm just sorry my technology is so limited here.
No problem.
I can't even explain all the craziness, but here we are.
Yeah. So all that craziness, that is a very important and interesting topic right now, because as schools and districts start allowing more people to bring technology into the building, we have to start dealing with this stuff. And if you can't use Skype at all in your school, what kind of doors are you closing and not allowing the interaction and amazing things to happen? So,
well, and I think that there are avenues in which teachers here could use them, but you have to have the right technology, passwords, and support person or standing by to remind you and help you and coach you through that. And I'm kind of excited because we have a new position that we're opening here. Our librarian is retiring, and so we are hiring a media center assistant to come in and kind of play a dual role of making the library resources available, but also becoming kind of our technology point person for the high school. So she is going to be that person for me. Who we've got a technology director for the district, but he's just not always accessible when I need him. And so I'm excited about having somebody in-house who can help me through some of these questions, because there's this easy solution here, and a part of it is even on our website options or our wireless options. There's a SPS guest which anybody can access, and then there's an SPS that's for staff only. But every time I try to log into that through my laptop, it requires some authentication password that I don't have access to. And so I know the process exists. It's just getting the right person to help me figure it out. Yeah,
SPS. What does that mean?
Sky to Public Schools. So we have wireless routers that are located throughout our building, and so anybody that's in our building can be on a wireless device as a guest. And then we have a second wireless route available just for staff, but sometimes it's hard to log into because the password changes.
Yeah, that makes sense. Interesting. Okay, cool. So, talk to me about your book. It's called Principal Matters, right?
Yeah, I'm excited about it. This is the culmination of a couple of years of writing content, opportunities to speak to principal groups or graduate classes or aspiring principals who keep asking a lot of the same questions. And I wanted to take an opportunity to put some of that content into one place. I create a lot of content on my website and try to push something out every week for people. And I've been able to share some of that content through some shared websites like connectedprincipals.com. And it's been wonderful to get the feedback and the readership and the collaboration. But I've been asked to speak at a number of events where afterwards people are asking me more questions and are looking for more resources. So I decided to make it a 2014 goal to put something together that I could print as well as have available online.
Mm-hmm.
So Principles Matters was my attempt to do that. So it's not a long read. It's 24 chapters of information that that I would primarily communicate to the new principal. So topics like understanding your purpose, dealing with difficult people, setting key responsibility areas for your staff, communicating effectively, managing school-wide crisis. You and I've talked about that before.
Yep.
Disciplining with dignity, and then learning what hats you wear as a school principal. So it's a book that's both in some ways introspective in parts, philosophical in parts, but then practical in other parts too.
Well, and I've I interviewed you before. The moment has teased me, and I can't remember what episode it was that we interviewed. But if you go to my website, transformativeprincipal.com, and search for Will Parker, you'll find the interview we did before.
First conversation.
And that was really cool. I learned so much from you from that short conversation. And then I've been following your blog and learning from you there. You're incredibly thoughtful in the way that you write, and it comes across that you have a plan for every possible circumstance that you could come up against, right? And you and I both know that you really don't, but you have a way of dealing with things. Can you talk about the process you go through when you're confronted with something, and how you make decisions when the pressure's on, and how you don't get overwhelmed and you still come across as thoughtful when you're dealing in those situations?
Man, that's so many things to respond to. First, let me just say that I don't always have a plan for every situation, but often what you are reading when you read my posts is at the end of a process, when I've been able to digest what just happened, or how did we come up with a solution. Part of my goal is self-serving. I want to write about it and remember, so that the next time I'm facing that situation, I can refer back to my experience.
Yep.
And I want to provide lessons for other leaders who may be facing something similar. And there are some common steps that you go through whenever you're facing situations that tend to, if you tend to follow those processes, then you can find solutions more easily than the next time. So let me just give you, for instance, this time last year I was ending. I've been a school administrator since 2004. Most of that in the capacity of an assistant principal in two different locations. One of a large school, and then in this school is a medium-sized school. And by medium-sized, I have a school population of about 750 students. The school that I was at previous to this one had about 1,400 students in high school, and so over time, as I've encountered new challenges, each time I've moved into a new situation, I found myself having to learn something that I've never done before. So 2 years ago, when I stepped into the site principal role, where I was now training assistant principals under me and being the final answer at my school level, I ran into some challenges that I didn't realize were being managed by my site principal. And one of those is, how do you manage the end of school? And so my most recent post was on 5 tips for preparing for your next school year or your next launch. And so this time last year, I sat down and just made a list of all of the actions that we had to take to end out the year and to make sure that the summer was productive. So when school ended for us on May 21st or 22nd, I can't remember now because we just had graduation, I came back after the holiday, and I opened my notes to this time last year, so that I could see, okay, where were we this time last year in terms of actions that we were taking, which helped me put together a quick list for my staff to look at in terms of to-dos that we have coming up in the next couple of weeks and over the summer, which turned into a list of about 35 actions that we take in the summer to make sure that we are prepared for admin reports, counseling reports, main office reports, budgeting items, and then miscellaneous things that you want to take care of before school starts. So I'm constantly trying to think through what are the steps that I take now? How can I record the process so that the following year when I'm encountering this same scenario, the stress level is lower, and it's working. And so I'll just speak to 5 things that I think help whenever you're confronting a new challenge. And with the summer list being my example, I always make a list and I prioritize. I try to write down everything that I know is coming up, and then I try to prioritize by assigning which of those should happen first, which second, which third, or at least what's priority, what's at the top of the list, and what's at the middle of the list, what's at the bottom. So once I've made a list, then the second thing I do is assign responsibilities and delegate. I pull in my team members, we look at those lists together, and then we decide who's responsible for what. Because a lot of principals I've found manage a lot of responsibilities themselves, and they are overwhelmed. Or on the other hand, they try to delegate everything, and their staff feels burned out, and do not feel like their principal's carrying his weight.
Yeah.
So I try to.
If I may interrupt real quick, or a third thing is that they delegate but don't have a good process for following up, and so or giving clear directions, so they end up doing everything anyway, even when they're trying to delegate.
That's right. So when I take my second step, which is assigning responsibilities and delegating, we create a shared Google Doc so that we can go in and open it and check off what's being accomplished, and I can look at that daily to see, okay, where are we in terms of accomplishing these lists. And then the third thing I do is I just try to redesign our summer work hours to meet our summer demands, because summer is so different than the school year. And my staff stays with me 10 days after school closes, and they're back with me 10 days before school opens. And I'm on a 12-month contract, so I'm in and out throughout the summer. I can take vacation days at certain times, but so summers are still pretty busy for me. But I try to redesign our working hours in those end of school days, beginning of school days, so that we're here a little bit later, leave a little bit earlier. Our Fridays are short, so that we're out by lunch, so that my office staff, they're already so tired from the school year anyway, so that we're wrapping up all of these to-dos with something to look forward to each day, and for them to feel like that the work time is a little shorter, and it also keeps us focused, because we're only here for a short time each day, so we've got a lot to do in the time that we're doing. So the third thing I do is try to redesign those working hours. And then the fourth thing I try to focus on is how can I collaborate for those more difficult tasks, because inevitably you're going to have something that's bigger than you. So working with a partner or working with more than one person on projects that require lots of numbers or projects that require lots of thinking, so that not one person's feeling overwhelmed with the tasks at hand. And then the fifth thing I try to insist on with those summer to-dos is that everyone takes a real break, that I know when their vacation times are going to be, that we push for that goal. There's sometimes some of my office folks who come in later to make up some work that they've maybe didn't finish, or maybe they took their vacation a little early. So we work on that together. So that, but I love everyone leaving and getting rested and really feeling refreshed and recharged, so that when we come back, we're ready to hit the year feeling new again, and because that's so important for the start of school.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, and it's easy to get swallowed up in the things that we have to do and let them control our lives and force us to work more than we really should. Finding ways to take time off, I think, is really valuable. Those sound like really great strategies. So you use Google Docs. What other tools do you use to help you accomplish that? Are you the kind of guy who writes things down in a notebook, and you got a big huge notebook full of all your to-dos, or are you using some other tools to help you be organized in that?
Well, most of what I do is when I create a list or something for my staff, is I always email it to them so that they have a copy of that, and then I always keep a copy for myself. I don't. Uh, I use Gmail for and our school allows us to use Gmail as our school address. Even though we have a school address, it's a Gmail account.
Mm-hmm.
And I've just found Gmail to be invaluable for a place for me to search back for lists of things that I've done before. I do use shared Google Docs, and so that's an easier place for me to go back to and find things that I've done before. I've just started playing around with Evernote, although I can't say that I'm using it effectively. My wife is a huge Evernote fan, so she's trying to teach me how to use it more effectively. But really, in a selfish way, my blog has become a place for me to create content that I go back to.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, you and I, the last time we talked about how to manage crisis or how to manage grief whenever there's a death in a school.
Yeah.
And I referred to one of the experiences that we had here with a student death. And since that time, when we've had other situations that have involved student crisis, I will go to my own content, my own blog, and go back and look at those posts and read them and go, okay, what are the lessons that I've learned here that I'm sharing with other people while they were fresh in my mind, and how can I use those now to make sure that I'm not missing out on opportunities and steps that are important in this situation because it was fresh to me then, so I can go back and look at it now and remind myself why that was important. So I never really intended for my blog to become a place for resources for me. But it is. It's a place that I go sometimes when I'm looking for information that I've written about and that has helped other people.
Yeah, and that's great. And what I love about that is that you're writing it down when it's fresh, so that you know how to deal with that in the future. You talked about your notes for where you were last year at this time of the year. Where were those kept? You said you went back to see where you were last year. What did you go back to?
Well, last year I had, after I had met with my staff in the summer, I had, this time last year when we met, I had sat down and typed up a list of summer to-dos that I'd shared with them, and then I almost always follow my staff meetings up with an email so that there's a written record of the conversation that we had. And so I just went back to my Gmail account, searched for this date last year, opened up May of 2014, found that summer to-do email, opened it up, and then pulled that list out to study it to create the one that we're using now. This year, I uploaded it to Google Docs so that not only was it something that I could follow up with as an email, but then it's something that we could all share and touch together and check things off the list. And then I created a third place for it on my website when I decided to post about it last week. I linked to just a PDF that I'd created there of summer to-dos so that I'd have a place to find on my website too, and an example for other people to look at.
So, you don't have to blog about this stuff. You don't have to share it out with everybody, but you do. Why do you do that?
Well, when I was a young principal, I had some good mentors who would take time to help me think through things that I didn't know how to do. But I was also overwhelmed. And I remember the crisis that I was in the second year that I was an assistant principal, where I was so busy and so overwhelmed and so unsure of how to accomplish all the tasks that I had in front of me that I considered just getting out of the profession. I'll never forget the night that I was sitting at home talking to my wife, and we had 4 young children, and at that time they were even younger because this was before my youngest was born. So my children were small, and my wife had taken off work to stay at home with our children, and I was a young assistant principal, and I was gone all the time. I was at every school activity. And when I wasn't at school activities, I was up late reading emails and answering questions. I was up early answering emails. I had this misconception that I could answer every question that a teacher had and satisfy every concern that every person in my school would have, because that was my job. I thought was to make sure that every person had a solution to their problems. What I didn't anticipate was burnout. And so when I was sitting with my wife one evening, she said to me, not in any way at all with bitterness or anger, just kind of out of resignation, she said, Will, I've accepted that you are a husband and a father now on the weekends, but during the week, the school pretty much owns you. And I thought that she went to bed that night, and I sat down at my my laptop, and instead of working, I wrote my letter of resignation.
Wow.
And I took it to work with me, and I put it in a file on my desk, and I just held it. And I thought, if things don't change soon, I'm leaving this profession, because I have been so dedicated to trying to figure out how to best serve this school that in the process, I've forgotten how to serve my family. And I can't tell you any magic story of how that all changed. I can tell you that I had an opportunity to open up for me to move to a smaller school with a principal who believed in investing time in training me, and who also valued her family, and another assistant principal who, when I moved into that position, both of them talked to me about their priorities, and I shared with them that, hey, this is kind of my chance to see if I can serve in a school and do it the right way. Because if this doesn't work, I'm probably going to be looking for a new profession. And so they dedicated to me also at that time to push me out the door and to hold me accountable for quality time with my family. I write about this in one of the chapters in my book, and there's a picture that Zig Ziglar uses called the Wheel of Life.
Yep.
And if you look at it, it's a circle, and then each spoke has a different priority. It would be work or family or finances or health or career or spirituality. And I tend to say, whenever I'm talking about that wheel, in my own personal life, my faith is really important. And I feel like if you take your core values and make those the hub, and then and let everything else feed out of those core priorities, then there's a whole lot more balance in that wheel. I was focusing so much on my career spoke that the rest of those areas were just really hurting. I'd gained 20 pounds. I was unhealthy. My marriage was suffering. My children weren't seeing their dad. And so as I began to find more balance, and I began to find solutions that involved other people, that were more collaborative, that were more process-driven instead of just me being a Superman, I began to learn. I began to learn lessons of how to create a better balanced approach to being a school leader. And so as a result, I started enjoying my work more, and which meant I enjoyed the rest of my life more. And so 10 years later, I kind of feel like I'm at the point now where these processes have helped me have greater job satisfaction, and I don't feel like I'm burned out. And so I really want that for school leaders, because I meet so many school leaders who are just living with an enormous amount of stress, and they never feel like they're free to do anything other than just put out fires all the time. And so do I. I mean, there's times where it's inevitable. It's almost like you're working as a paramedic. I mean, there's times when there's a fire to put out and you've got to go be there for the emergency. But there's also processes that you can create to help manage all of that, so that you're doing it with a team. You're not a Superman. And I love that quote. I think I heard Dave Ramsey one time. I enjoy listening to him and reading his stuff. But he said, tuck in your cape. You're no Superman. And I like to remember that and remind principals of that too, because so to answer your question, the reason that I like to write about these things, and the reason I like to post about them for other school leaders, and not just school leaders, but people in general, because they're principles that apply in other occupations and professions in life, is because I want to see them enjoy the work that they do and discover processes that work. And I figure, hey, if it's working for me, then this may be something that can work for others too.
Yeah, and I just want to respond to a couple of things in there, because they're things that that we as principals, it's very easy to overlook. So we are doing a really important job changing kids' lives. We are making a huge impact on them, and it's easy for us to think that is so important that we can sacrifice our own family sometimes. And I don't think any of us do that intentionally. We don't say the students at my school are more important than my own kids, but it kind of happens when you're in that put out fire mode and that's what you're doing all the time. It's easy for that to creep in and start taking things over. And, my wife is going to be really glad to hear that you shared your conversation with your wife, because we've had similar conversations as well. And
sure,
it's not that, that I don't want my own family to come first. It's just that it's a huge job, and I've made plenty of excuses for why that huge job needs to be done by me. But just yesterday, I was speaking with my assistant principal about how we want our lives to be, and how we want our work lives to be. And we both strongly believe that when we help someone solve a problem, it's not enough for us to solve it for them. We need to teach them how to solve it themselves. And that's a huge, important part of us being able to empower those that we work with, from our teachers to our students to our paraprofessionals to our students' parents. We need to empower them to be able to solve their own problems and not think that coming to us is going to fix it. Coming to us is going to help them learn how to fix it. And having that mind shift where that's what we're focusing on, we get to stay the teacher and be someone who's teaching someone, not someone who's putting fires out all the time, because that's exhausting and no fun.
And there's a couple of things that I'd respond to that with is, number one is if you can, as you're hiring, if you can hire people or recruit people or have people on your team who share the same kind of values that you do, or who can accomplish those kinds of tasks, or are quality people, then you've got the right people on your team. And then to give them specific guidance so that the job that they do is well understood on the front end. It's sometimes we spend so much time correcting people in mid performance or on the back end, when if we give them instruction on the front end of what's expected, it's just like teaching. It's just like being in the classroom. When on the front end, if you create the expectations for your students in your classroom, then those processors are put in place so that you have more successful instruction. It always goes hand in hand. And I've always said that a great teacher teaches with both hands or both sides of their brain at the same time. They're instructing with one, they're managing with the other. And that management is the processes, the procedures, the corrections, the discipline, and then the instruction is the content and all of the information that has to be relayed and the learning that takes place. And they go hand in hand, and it's an art and a science. And school management's the same way. A school is just a larger classroom setting, and your staff are like your students. They're not any different in terms of their need for clear expectations. So, for instance, I have a new immediate assistant role that we've created for a person in our building who's going to be both helping in our library resources and who's going to be a technology support for our school. And so I sat down last week and this week, and we developed a page full of key responsibility areas for that specific job, so that both of us know going into it what her responsibilities are going to be, what her specific areas are for supervision, what she's responsible for in terms of scheduling, repairs, installation, you name it, in terms of technology support. That way, on the front end, both of us have a clear view of where she's going and what she's going to do. I do the same thing with all my office staff, my secretaries, my counselors, my assistant principals, and myself. We all have, I call them KRAs, and I stole this idea from a book called Entree Leadership by Dave Ramsey, because he trains people in terms of business management. And I thought, well, let me take that same idea and apply it to school management. And he calls his are key results areas, because they're doing a lot of sales. We don't do sales at school. And so I call them key responsibility areas, because I'm more interested in everyone being in charge of their responsibilities. But we call them KRAs. And so those are lists that we review together every single year so that everyone knows what these expectations are. And man, it just takes away so much stress when you already know ahead of time who's responsible for what. And including all of the reports that I do for my state, I go through those lists and determine what are my areas to control, which of those am I delegating, who's assisting me with them, so that we know on the front end. And it's easier the next year, because each year we can revisit those and decide what was practical and what needs to be changed.
Yeah, and those key responsibilities areas, the KRAs, are super powerful, and we talked a lot about those in our last interview, which was I did look it up while we were talking, episode 24 of the Transformative Principle.
Oh, cool.
So, Hey, thanks so much for listening to my podcast. I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me that you're downloading it, that you're listening to it, and that you're listening all the way here until the end. If you could do me a favor and go to iTunes and rate this podcast and then share it on social media, that would be really great and I'd really appreciate it. Thanks so much and have a great day. Thank you so much for downloading and listening to this podcast. Please subscribe in iTunes or Stitcher, and please feel free to give us a rating on Stitcher Radio or on iTunes so that we can help spread the word about how much we're learning in this podcast. Thank you so much for listening. You can find me on Twitter at Jethro Jones.